Ukrainian soldiers have refuted reports of Russian invaders advancing near the settlement of Zverev, southwest of Pokrovsk. The fighters note that in this area, Russian commanders disregard their own personnel and continue to. They keep sending small infantry groups to try to locate Ukrainian firing positions. But such groups are immediately detected and eliminated.
As a rule, these are completely unmotivated soldiers who lack sufficient military training. Some of the captured contract soldiers had never served anywhere before, and their military training was limited to just a week at a training ground. Experienced occupiers cynically refer to such soldiers as disposable. They are given a task, for example, to move toward a neighboring settlement or a forest strip that is supposedly already controlled by the Russians. A group of 2 to 4 soldiers calmly sets out, and as they approach, the Ukrainians open fire on them. Alexei Belsky, spokesperson for the Dnipro Operational Strategic Group of Troops, in a comment to the Ukrainian agency.
The Pokrovsk direction remains the most difficult. However, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the situation there is under control. Since the beginning of the day, Ukrainian soldiers in this sector have repelled more than a third of all Russian assaults.
The situation in the Pokrovsk direction, north of Pokrovsk, is very dynamic and changes a lot. Very quickly, every day. Nevertheless, this success of the Ukrainian armed forces allowed the President of Ukraine to tell his American counterpart, to show his American audience, that we are not only defending ourselves, we are also advancing. Yes, this is not a strategic offensive, it's not a liberation on a grand scale. It's operational tactical, but it is an advance. And it works.
Load. Ready. Fire. In the North Slobozansky sector, the Marines carried out a brilliant operation. The soldiers said that first, the strike drone operators, working together with the artillery, hit the enemy positions with fire more than once, and then the assault troops finally cleared the territory that the Russians had tried to capture. The defense forces of Ukraine are also steadfastly holding their positions in the Novopavlivka, Toretsk, Lyman, and Siversk directions, inflicting significant losses on the enemy in manpower and equipment.
At the moment, they are deploying hundreds of groups, which are very difficult to track in each sector, but by identifying, so to speak, their fire support and troop concentrations, we strike those areas with drones accordingly. Or, if a larger group advances, we use artillery. So it's a tough, complicated job.
In the Kherson region, our soldiers destroyed the latest Russian radar station for detecting ultra-small targets, called repel, which is capable of detecting more than 250 UAVs. Its cost. It was completely destroyed and blown up in the temporarily occupied territory of Crimea. The soldiers emphatically note that this particular radar station serves as, so to speak, the crucial eyes of the entire air defense missile system, providing essential surveillance and targeting capabilities for the protection of airspace. And without the surveillance and targeting element, the entire system loses its combat effectiveness. The cost of one division of 4 S-400 air defense missile system vehicles is approximately $625 million.
Ukrainian defense forces eliminated 920 Russian servicemen over the past day. As a result, the total losses of the Russian Federation's army have exceeded 1,111,000. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In addition, 1 Russian tank, 3 armored combat vehicles, 13 artillery systems, as well as 33 units of enemy automotive and special equipment were destroyed. Joining our broadcast is Pavlo Lekichuk, Head of Military Programs at the Center for Global Studies Strategy 21. Pavlo, we're glad to have you with us. Glory to Ukraine.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Allow me to congratulate our soldiers on Defender of Ukraine Day. Yes. And wish them God's protection.
I join in and congratulate you as well, because we know that you are a naval officer and so on. And from this perspective, you often comment for us on events at the front. Well, Pavlo, it seems this mission has fallen to you to offer congratulations. Not only to congratulate our defenders, both men and women, but also, maybe to give a bit of an overview of where the Ukrainian army stands now. since 2014, since the beginning of Russian aggression.
To understand what has happened since 2014, we need to remember what things were like before 2014. I'm convinced that our army was deliberately dismantled. There was even a term, the Ministry of Surplus Property Disposal, referring to excess assets, meaning the Ministry of Defense. Unfortunately, by 2014, we had reached a point where we had only about 5 combat-ready brigades in terms of personnel. And the fact that the Ukrainian army was able to stop the Russian advance in Donbass in the summer and fall of 2014, it was a miracle performed by our soldiers, who, by the way, had to endure not only moral and physical trials at that time, but also ethical ones, the test of their ability to stand up to the Russian aggressor. In 11 years, the Ukrainian army has changed beyond recognition. Now, the Ukrainian army, I don't even know how to assess it exactly, whether we're the first or second in Europe. Can we consider the Russian occupiers' army number 1? I wouldn't say so, because yes, they have more weapons, yes, they have more ammunition. The Russian army is bigger than ours, but the Ukrainian army is showing that the key factor. The key factor for the defense forces, the key factor for any army, is its moral and psychological state. Our army surpasses the enemy morally and psychologically. Our soldiers know what they are fighting for. They are defending their homeland. The Russians, the mercenaries, the Russians know they're invading a foreign country for money, to loot and to kill. That's not the kind of moral motivation that makes forces or compels the armed forces to have the capacity to be truly resilient both in terms of offense and effectively in defense. Well, this is an example for European countries, which over 30 years of so-called oil or peace dividends managed to lose a significant portion of their military strength. I still remember the times when the German, French, and British armies, they used to be among the most powerful in the world. Now, unfortunately, when the Bundestag asks for an analysis of the Bundeswehr's warehouses, even the Germans themselves are shocked. It turns out they don't have enough tanks for themselves and are resorting to cannibalizing their own equipment. However, the undeniable fact that many European citizens genuinely do not wish to actively defend their own respective countries is also a truly sad and unfortunate reality that we must acknowledge.
Well, as they say, they still don't fully realize it yet. God forbid a war breaks out. We don't know how the population would react. Of course, they would probably defend their country. No one expected such resistance from Ukraine either, especially in the Russian Federation. So, I'd like to talk about the enemies, since it turns out the so-called Second Army in the world is already boasting. I think you've already seen how so-called war correspondents and propagandists are writing with admiration that the rebirth of Russian cavalry has begun in the Russian Federation. Let me quote further. This was taken up by the commander of the Special Forces Unit Storm of the 9th Brigade, part of the 51st Army, stationed in the occupied part of Ukraine's Donetsk region, with the call sign Khan. Well, let's put it this way. Storming Ukrainian positions on motorcycles due to a shortage of heavy equipment. This is how Russian soldiers have started to master cavalry charges as well. Now, to continue the quote. In fact, it's necessary to train not only the riders in offensive tactics, but also the horses themselves. Pavel, how do you assess the situation? Why have they resorted to these new old methods of warfare? And isn't this also related to a shortage of gasoline, among other things? By the way, speaking of recent events, I wanted to tell our viewers and you that another oil refinery is currently on fire in Yaroslavl, Russia. Well, since the media are reporting that these are as close to real training exercises as possible, it turns out they're happening, meaning this isn't a result of drone attacks. According to the governor, the fire at the refinery is of a technological nature and is not related to a drone attack. Pavel, how do you assess the capabilities of what was once the world's second largest army?
As for the cavalry, that's a natural stage in the development of the Russian army. First there were donkeys, which were handed over to the army, then Yakushin reindeer to reindeer, but now they've got horses. Obviously, the next step is water buffalo. Laos, back in 2017, handed over to Russia 2 regiments of T-34 tanks for their arsenal, and well, Laos still has water buffalo. And most likely, in the near future, the armed forces of the Russian Federation will soon have combat buffalo in their arsenal. Combat moose. Well, moose. Moose are being hunted. As for reality, well, first of all, the Russians had mountain rifle brigades in service, but the point was that horses were used there as pack animals for the highlands, really. Where machinery doesn't work, where there's a lack of oxygen, Russian generals believed they could use pack horses. The fact that there are pack horses in the Russian army is true. Well, and everything they have, they're dragging into Ukraine now. From the Arctic Circle, Arctic all-terrain vehicles. The naval infantry is fighting on Arctic all-terrain vehicles in the steppes of Zaporizhia. They're hauling other weapons from the Far East, from Siberia. If you look at the air defense systems in Primorai, Kamchatka, Sakhalin, where there used to be anti-aircraft missile brigades, now there are empty clearings. Why? Because all that gear has now been dragged to Crimea, to Donbass, because our soldiers are taking them out every day, step by step. The Russian industry simply can't handle producing these anti-aircraft missile systems. They just can't keep up with their production. The same goes for auxiliary armor. Even the NTLB is becoming scarce. So it's not just a shortage. The shortage of gasoline, the lack of fuel, is forcing the Russian occupiers to ride horses, and there's an overall shortage of equipment too. They thought they had overwhelming superiority over Ukraine, over Europe. 4 years of war in Ukraine have shown that this is absolutely not the case.
Thank you, Pavel, for joining us. Let me remind our viewers, Pavel Lekichuk, Head of Military Programs at the Center for Global Studies Strategy 21, was with us via video link.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.